Hey Critical Analysis, this is your Chapter 6 vocabulary video, so hopefully you are way accustomed to this now that I have broken it up into the the lecture video, so to speak, and then the vocabulary section. So we're going to be in week 9, which is your Chapter 6 content, and for the materials, obviously you'll have your study guide, which is loaded right there. And then we will be talking about the vocabulary words in context with the vocabulary quiz itself. So I'll kind of get that out and ready as well. Okay, so I've got the vocabulary guide up behind me. We are going to jump right in. We are going to use our textbook per normal to kind of guide where these vocabulary words are coming from. So hopefully you've already watched the Chapter 6 video itself because it would have talked about a lot of these readings already. So hopefully you have, in fact, read the readings and you may have already come across several of these words. But if I'm looking at our study guide, and again, I always like to kind of use my study guide that's already filled out as a basis of discussion, you're going to see that these first 3 words come from the biography section. So they're starting right away with the bio, and the quickest way that I can get there is if I click on Reading 2, and I just go to Reading 2. I scroll down, lots of scrolling with this book. All the way down, here's my biographical profile. And Eric Holder, who was the Attorney General from 2009 to 2015. So he holds kind of a special spot in history since he was the first African American to hold this particular position. And he's got a lot of experience. Obviously, this chapter, as a reminder, is about criminal justice. So it's revolving around, the criminal justice system and the many different careers that fall under that category. So I'm going to encourage you to, if you haven't already, go ahead and read that biographical profile. So he's done a lot of stuff. It's pretty impressive. So it's not terribly long. So again, I'll encourage you to pause the video and read, and then we're going to talk about the 3 vocabulary words that come from this profile. All right. Hopefully you have read the profile and you're back with me. 3 words. Unresolved means just simply to not be resolved. If you have unresolved issues with someone, they are still an issue. It hasn't been resolved. This country, speaking in a very general sense, has a lot of unresolved issues, right? We don't have resolution, and that's just how we are. Our country's been like that for hundreds of years, and in fact, it could sometimes be a good thing because it means you might encourage conversation and try to come to a solution. But in general, unresolved means there is still an issue. It is not solved yet. Mentoring on page 301 as well means just giving advice or counsel. If you're mentoring someone, you're kind of like a role model for them. You're guiding them, helping them through a particular maybe field or issue, or you might have a mentor at the college. Maybe it's your advisor, maybe it's another professor. So someone who gives advice. And then controversial is just, it's not agreed upon. Again, to me, there's some echoing to unresolved. It just means it can be debated. And it can be something as trivial as the best pizza topping or something, or all the way up to bigger, larger social, religious, moral, ethical type issues. So anything that can be kind of debated or not agreed upon, controversial. All right, so our next set of vocabulary words is going to come from our next reading here. It's going to be reading 3, the other Westmore. This is part of your text sheet, so hopefully you've already watched that video. We've talked about this reading. We've talked about the text sheet that goes along with this reading. This is where this next set of vocabulary words come from, so hopefully you've already read that, and so we can just talk about the words. This goes from heinous down to superficial. All right, so let's talk about these words. Heinous means something wicked or awful. It talks about like a heinous crime. It's almost like it's hard to even imagine something that bad is what heinous is. Perpetrators is someone accused of committing a crime. They're not necessarily found guilty yet. They're just someone who is accused of committing a crime. They are someone they believe to have committed a crime. Accountability means to be held responsible. So if you're accountable, it means to be held responsible, that you are going to be like, yep, I did it, or I didn't do it. Here's what I'm going to do to fix the situation. So accountability just means responsibility. Correspondence is written communication, whether that's a letter, whether that's an email, whether it's a text. It's just a way to stay in communication with someone. In the story, the other Westmore, he wrote letters. And then superficial is just kind of on the surface. It's not a deep level. You may hear this described for, like, sometimes you might hear a person like, oh, they're superficial. They only care about the surface. You know, they don't look any deeper. A superficial cut, for instance, can just be like a little scratch on the surface of your skin. It doesn't go very deep. So that is what superficial is. All right, the word accosted, now we did read this in our text sheet video, comes from reading number 4 here, the library visit reading. So again, ideally you've already watched my video that went over the text and skills practice sheet, so you've already read this article. We only have one vocabulary word from the article being used, the word accosted, meaning to be approached aggressively. You know, it's not a good thing to be accosted. There's an aggressive component to that. Not necessarily physical. I mean, it could get physical, but even someone just kind of like stomping up to you like really quickly, really kind of maybe it seems like they're very angry, that could be like in a form of being accosted. All right, then we are going to go from reclusive, so I'm going to leave that kind of right there, down to thrust. So these right here. Now, what's different about this particular set of vocabulary is they come from a reading that's not in the text and skill practice. They come from reading number 5. It's a rather short reading. It's a disturbing reading, to be quite honest, because it brings up a lot of negative things that have happened in our country in regard to kind of mass shootings and mass disasters, but again, all under the umbrella of that criminal justice, which encompasses a lot of different fields, a lot of different topics. So I will encourage you to pause the video here and read this. Again, it's not terribly long, goes to right there, and then we're going to talk about the vocabulary words. All right, hopefully you've had a chance to read that. We're going to talk about these words here. Reclusive means you want to be alone. You might have heard the word recluse. So reclusive means you value your alone time. Some of us may have felt this way over this past year during quarantine, very reclusive, individual, kind of solitary type thing. Down here we have disengagement. You are disengaged, meaning you're withdrawn or detached. So a lot of times it's talked about like social disengagement, meaning you're not interacting with people. Again, weird, but it can kind of describe how some of us might have been this past year and maybe continue to be based on our comfort of, going out and about. We might be withdrawn or a little bit detached from society. Reignited means to start up again. So maybe you had a conversation years ago or even weeks ago and it's kind of died down a little bit, but then someone brings it up and you're like, oh, reignited. We're going to talk about this again. We're going to bring this up again and address it now. And then thrust, to push or drive with force. The way that it is talked about in the paragraph here, it says a different kind of criminal event thrust itself, it kind of like pushed itself on our society. So it kind of forced itself in there. All right. Last set of words here comes from our TED Talk. The word incarceration all the way down to prosecutorial misconduct. So if I go back to our textbook, I'm going to scroll down. Here is our TED Talk. And he's one of my favorites. I really like Brian Stevenson, and I know I talked about him in our chapter 6 video, but I enjoy him. So hopefully you have already read or listened to his TED Talk, and the rest of the vocabulary words come from there. So here we go. Incarceration just means jailed, to be incarcerated. You've been imprisoned. Apartheid is a policy of segregation. They practiced this in South Africa for many years. Even though the United States did as well, they didn't call it apartheid. They just called it segregation, but it's the same idea, is the policy of segregation, normally by race. There is apartheid in other ways, but it's like a policy of segregation, mostly by race. Exonerated is to be found innocent. Maybe you were charged with a crime, but you were later exonerated based on like new evidence. Culpability, to me, is very similar to, in fact, they're synonyms, to like accountability, which is above there, and then like responsibility. You're being held responsible. Injustice is unfair, so it maybe something is not being treated equally across the board. It is the policy of unfairness. Oppression is to hold down or back a group of people or a person, not not physical, although you could physically oppress someone, it's more like socially oppression, access to things to try to hold them back. And then prosecutorial misconduct, the wrongdoing on the prosecutor's part. So the prosecutor, the lawyer in the situation, has done something either on accident, they didn't fill the form out correctly, or maybe it was a blatant wrongdoing. Regardless, there's a phrase for it, prosecutorial misconduct, the wrongdoing on the prosecutor's part. All right, so when you are comfortable with all those vocabulary terms, you will, of course, get back in here and your Chapter 6 quiz and Dropbox. So you'll pull up the quiz. Too many files to put down here. Okay, Part A. I'm still having to say this, but my guess is, again, those of you watching this have caught on. Only one sentence is correct, so please only write the word correct one time. And just putting the word not does not fix the sentence. So, I thrive when I am not reclusive around a lot. That's not going to fix the sentence, guys. I need to know that you actually know what the word means, how you can apply it in a sentence. So, don't just add the word not. Keep the underlined word the same. These are all errors I'm still seeing, even though we're in week 9. So I just really want to make sure that you're aware of that. So only one is correct. Do something to the rest of them to make them used appropriately. Short answer, Part B. Just make sure you actually answer the question. Again, I'm still every once in a while seeing someone, if it says give an example, they just define. Well, that's not what it says. It says give an example of how to do these things. So it's making you apply the definition of the underlined word. And then finally, fill in the blank. So just making sure, and a quick tip, because I've seen it a few times where I'm like, again, if that person would have just read the sentence out loud, they would have heard that it didn't sound quite right with the word they chose. So just make sure you double check it. All right, that is your Chapter 6. You're going to want to submit that by Sunday. Okay, hopefully you've already checked out the Chapter 6 video, which goes over the text and skill, practice homework, and discussion board. If not, go ahead and do so. And also be sure to check on over to your Mastery Skills Assessment for this week's video as well. All right,